Our next panel is called From Resilience to Unity, the Power of Leadership. Here we will be speaking about leadership because during the times of crisis, leaders have to play a pivotal role in maintaining resilience and balance in their communities. They not only have to address challenges, but also have to create conditions for recovery and development. We are going to have leaders who represent here a variety of different areas, but what they have in common is that at a particular point in their times, in their lives, in the lives of their countries, they had to explore some of their leadership things. I would like to introduce our participants. Dan Rice, president of the American University Kief, former officer of the U.S. Army. Hello and welcome. Zoya Litvin is next, founder of Osvitoria NGO and the Novopečerska School. Olena Zubchenko, deputy chairwoman of the management board at Sense Bank. Vsevolod Kozhemyaka, founder of Ergo Trade Group, commander of Khartia volunteer unit, military unit. Serhiy Zhadan, a writer, soldier of the same brigade, Khartia. And joining us online at the end of our panel discussion, it is Metropolitan Boris Gudziak, Archbishop of Philadelphia and Metropolitan of the Ukrainian Catholic Church in the USA. We thank everyone present here with us because gathering all of you in one place, leaders are so very much overburdened. They have to balance multiple challenges. Therefore, it's a great pleasure for us to have you all gathered here on the stage. And to make sure that we have the kind of a warm-up, I would like to start with a brief question. And if I can, let us start the timer. Make sure that you answer within 1 minute. What is leadership personally for you? What are the 3 facets of leadership for you? Mr. Sergiy, let us start with you. The 3 characteristics. Well, good morning, dear friends. Oh, good afternoon already, right? It's hard for me to speak about the 3 characteristics, but yesterday we had a conversation with the sergeants in our brigade. And something that transpired through their conduct and words was the ability to assume responsibility, ability and a willingness to take on the responsibility for the decision taking, that's something that others will not be willing to do. It's not because others don't have the necessary skills, but people lack resolution. They don't have the ability to take decisions as such. And this ability to be responsible for what you have said and believe in that, I suppose, is one of the quality. Within 40 seconds. Vsevolod, please. After Sergiy, good afternoon. After Sergiy, it's difficult to follow up on that or add anything of value. I will definitely subscribe to everything he has said. The 3 qualities or characteristics will be, first of all, the power to convince, resolution and decisiveness, decisiveness to make something a reality that you have decided to do, and resilience, endurance, because being able to lead people with your example or perform some difficult things, it's always a challenging thing indeed. People are supposed to have to be endurant enough because this is like a marathon running. I will probably repeat what's been said, but let me clarify. For me, the most important thing is about responsibility, about the responsibility of the people around you. Next, it's probably resilience. It's a kind of a different word, but you have to be strong and resilient in your convictions. You have to be confident of being able to change things and ensure both the team and the people around you at the macroeconomic level of the country or the whole world, the implementation of these new values. Thank you. Ms. Olena, I don't know what else can be added because they've spoken responsibility, bravery, something that hasn't been named from my perspective. The 3rd component, again, as far as I go, the main objective for a leader is to be able to grow other leaders. And this is one of the main core things why I work with education. But this is not only about that. It's also about our followers, about the teams that we have to engage with, about the people that we can mentor and support. By doing so, thank you.
Leaderships and how you can describe it in 3 words.
Yes, I think, at American University Kyiv, we're trying to create the future leaders of Ukraine. And, the most important thing, I think, leadership, a component of leadership is communication, clear and consistent communication. So I think we've seen amazing leadership here in Ukraine throughout the war. President Zelensky, I think, changed the world with 8 words. I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. General Zaluzhny, welcome to hell. That said it all. So clear and consistent communication is so important in leadership. And that's why I think it's so important for all of you to be here, because if every one of you leave here motivated, you can influence the world. This war is the first war in history, I believe, that's been influenced so much by the press and by leaders like yourselves through communication. That's how the Leopard movement started. And the Leopard movement was genius, and that got Leopard tanks, got M1A1s and Leopard tanks. So I think you coming away from this meeting and being inspired and going out there can actually show leadership and change the world.
Thank you, Dan. And I would like to start this panel with you, because I remember when we discussed leadership and what we're going to talk about in this panel maybe 3 weeks ago, you said that you can't wait till American elections, because they are going, whoever wins, they are going to be a new symbol of leadership, and they're going to give a new boost to Ukrainian and American relations. What we saw yesterday, like it or not, it's a clear example of a leadership. So what are your expectations, and what kind of leadership it demands from Ukraine to be on the same level of leadership with with the president-elect?
Yes, a lot of questions about the U.S. election, obviously, so thank you for asking. I personally believe that Ukraine has seen a change in leadership in the United States on July 21st, when President Biden withdrew from the election. He has been pushing for more and more support of Ukraine since he backed out. I think he realizes his legacy is Ukraine. And so there have been decisions that have been made since that are very positive for Ukraine, more and more weapons coming in. And I believe that will happen until January 20th when he leaves. I think under the leadership of President Trump, he will have a choice to be greatness, to pursue greatness, similar to like a Ronald Reagan. Legacies are made through what happens internationally, not domestically. He has a chance. I think his 4 key leaders that he chooses will tell us a lot. Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, and CIA Director. And we will learn a lot about his potential positions. They will be making the key decisions, those leaders, and they will make a big impact on Ukraine immediately. I do believe the new National Security Advisor, whoever it is, will be better than the current advisor, who is basically Jake Sullivan, who has been in a tough position, but he has been the one to hold back on weapons due to escalation. He kept saying escalation. I think any new national security advisor will be better, and that will help Ukraine.
And what are your best expectations of the personalities that can be appointed?
I believe the one person that can make the most impact, if he is appointed, is Mike Pompeo. And Mike's a friend of mine. Mike was CIA director, and he was Secretary of State. I'd like to see him be Secretary of Defense. That would be the last of the 3. I think that would really help Ukraine in so many ways. In his experience, both as a congressman and then as a CIA director and then Secretary of State, he understands the international landscape. He realizes this is a world war, that it is not just a single war. It's a combination of Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas, all together working against the free nations. And so I think Mike will come in and be strong across the world. With his experience and his leadership, I think Ukraine will be in a much better position.
Having said that, you think that Biden realized that Ukraine is one of his legacies that he wants to leave after he leaves the office. So in that respect, what do you expect from him in the 3 more months to come until the inauguration of the new president?
Well, I think unfortunately one of the policies has been to give Ukraine just enough, but not enough to win. And so that was the policy for 2.5 years. I think as soon as he realized he was leaving office, he escalated basically the number of weapons coming in and making positive decisions. So I think that'll maintain throughout till January 20th. But the impact that he has over the next 75 days is not just, will not end on January 20th, because shipments of weapons that arrive between now and then will still be available for the spring. So I think the United States is pushing more and more in as quickly as possible, and that's incredibly positive for Ukraine. Frankly, it should have happened 2.5 years ago, even before the war, but at least it's happening now.
Thank you very much. Зараз я хочу звернутися.
Now I would like
до
Now I would like to turn to Vsevolod. Speaking from your experience, all of these sounds, intrusive sounds, can cause a lot of havoc, but everything's okay. We are underground. So during the war, individual leadership, how does that get manifested? We get to hear a lot, and we are aware of the fact that army is all about order, is about being subjugated. So where's the place for leadership in all that? In the army, there should always be a place for leadership, although it's not always visible there. And saying, well, I would say that army is all about order, in particular the post-Soviet army, in particular the way that the Ukrainian army is nowadays. But these paragons of leadership, these sprouts of leaderships, they do come up. They need to be supported and cherished, but at the time when the moment comes, very important in the time of history of a particular country, nation, as we are going through it right now, then some people naturally pop up and they assume responsibility. And with that responsibility, they go and start undertaking very serious things. And the peer has said it very properly concerning cherishing, rearing, nurturing new leaders. When you are also constantly in dynamics doing some proper things, there will always be some people who will find you to support you, who will also take on this responsibility to do the same, but in perhaps some other areas, trying to help you or developing their own projects. So leadership within the army is a critical thing. For example, I know it for myself, and I understand that in the US Army, this is very much fostered and promoted, and there are some specially devised programs to develop all that. However, regardless of the fact that basically we never had this in place, and the historicity of the period that we have been confronted with and that we are going through right now has thrown to the surface the people that have started to resume responsibility. You are someone who went to fight from business. You have a huge experience that you have gained from business. Is it possible when you set up battalions, brigades in the army, is it still possible to apply available business models and follow the same template when you go for the defense forces? Well, business basically is all about administrative processes. That's definitely what the army needs, yes. And this is in the primary role of business is in many ways it's something that business does in a perfect way. And that's indispensable in the army too, administering processes. Understandably, you're not going to have any interest, not any return on something, but the return or interest that you gain in the army is something drastically different. The enemy destroyed, for example. And in fact, the snag or the problem of the armies, inefficient armies, units in particular, lies in the fact that nobody counts money. If you begin to count money, you immediately begin, this dawns on you how to act properly. And I suppose there is a very direct correlation, and I have become aware of that myself. The efficiency comes when you begin to utilize money efficiently. Can you provide any illustrations? Well, this would be pretty cynical. I wouldn't like to cite any such examples. Go ahead, please. Well, provisionally speaking, first of all, when performing certain missions or rules, when you train people, it's all about a low level of losses, because losses for the country, you understand that in terms of budget burden, is going to be way too much. When we, for instance, take how much funding goes to training a particular soldier, as opposed to how much goes to a hero who dies. I mean, these things are incomparable. We cannot somehow collate them. So the philosophy of these things have to be changed, and the ratio has to be changed. And basically, when you take decisions, let alone logistics, this is a separate story. Even when it goes down to the battlefield, within your command and control center, the person who's responsible, battle cap, when he sees the enemy and taking the decision about how to defeat the enemy, how to engage the enemy, they can take the decision, for instance, to do that with less efficiency, but using something more expensive like artillery. And you may go amiss at the first shot, and that'll take a couple of shots will go to waste. So a shell of 155 millimeters is about $4,000 per each shell. On the contrary, you can also apply a drone, which is much cheaper and which can definitely hit within the ballpark figure of 80%. And then it's up to the commander. And they have to see the situation for themselves. So there is very direct dependency in taking decisions about such critical things. You have also told me that to your division, to your department come the people, some guys who have already achieved a particular cap of leadership fulfillment in their areas. And now they cannot develop anymore due to different lacks that you have spoken about, that lack of transparency in decision-making, lack of managerial decisions. So how can you manage these leaders, the people who are capable of doing some things on their initiative? Well, the commander of the brigade is in charge of these leaders. I'm not the one. In order to manage and guide leaders, you have to be a strong leader yourself. But if you yourself lead people, guide them, if you keep developing yourself in ways, if you understand what it's all about, then leaders will naturally help you and you will help them. All you need is just to provide them a bit more freedom, a little more rein for maneuver, freedom of rein for maneuver, and they will do it themselves. But things to do with orders, etc., leaders learn very quickly. They're quick in uptake, and they pick up this hierarchy very quickly. They become very savvy about that. But leaders are usually the ones who are clearly mindful of results. They're goal setters and goal achievers, which is why, as you have properly put it, we take on the people who have achieved some invisible ceiling in their development. And commanders most of the time are more in favor of the process, whereas these guys, they're more responsible for the fruits. And if the result is not good enough, then the commander will definitely be punishable. Therefore, this is how we need to continue. Something else that I've just remembered from our previous conversation, a lot of young people crave to get to your place, people who are 18, 19-year-olds, who would like to take decisions concerning the defense of the country for themselves, the ones that want to volunteer. Can you tell us about these passionate young leaders who come to your brigade? What makes them special and distinctive? It's very easy to work with such guys. These passionate individuals that come to us and who want to get involved and who want to be helpful and useful for the country. All it takes is to teach them how to do it, because dying is so easy, so quick, but basically you need to teach them how to kill, how to be precise and accurate. So you need to teach them and curb and contain perhaps their initial willingness to dash somewhere, to run like crazy, but instead calm them down, to make them down to earth and begin to take in things gradually, because the main idea during the war is not to be hasty. This is the ground rule, and that's something that you need to be compliant with. But high-quality commanders, they're pretty much like mentors. They guide people, they see people, they realize where to apply these people, how to sometimes contain these people on the one hand, and in some other places perhaps to provide them with the free rein, some freedom. Unfortunately, not everyone wants to take some time or waste, as they think, time for that, and they just give orders. And sometimes these are tall orders. They're impossible to be fulfilled, and in such way we'll lose some of the best countrymen. the people who would be extremely useful not only during the war but in post-war time. Thank you very much. Ms. Zoya, we have just heard it from Mr. Vsevolod that young people need training, but young people also need to be imparted with knowledge, the knowledge and skills that Ukrainians need in the 21st century. Unfortunately, they turn out to be the ones that all speak in favor of being able to defend themselves. Like I heard it from a military officer. This was a figurative phrase that at school right now, the main thing, the two subjects matter. It's the defense of Ukraine and the history of Ukraine. The ability to the skill to die is the ability to defend yourself and knowing who to kill. Not talking about the history, but talking about the fundamental knowledge and skills in order to be victorious over your enemy with the help of technologies, better organization. However, along with that, making sure that our children are not like what Russia is doing to our children in the occupied territories, like kids being militarized, setting up these units of young army. Where do you see your contribution to maintaining the balance, striking the balance, to ensure that our children graduate from schools as clever patriots, smart patriots? Wow, what a tricky question, so complex at the same time. Well, I would start by saying that in education, the situation number one is all about mitigating educational losses. Because in order to work with the young people, they have to be intrinsic part of the system. They need to have the proper access to this education. However, nowadays, a third of Ukrainian children don't have the full access to that because the schools don't have shelters, so they are way too close to the front line, and they can only study online. And this is a failure, in many ways. So the educational task number one is to ensure that they do have this access to education. When this technical issue is troubleshot, then we have to understand what quality education this should be. And all of the leaders and employers know very well that 80% of employability, that is attractiveness of a particular girl or boy for an employer, is soft skills. This is not so much about the hard skills, but the ability to communicate, something that my peers have already mentioned, understanding your own leadership potential, how to express that, how to interact with others, etc. Now, it's also a super important task to take care of your own security. The fellow speaker has just said that the main idea in the army is not to make haste. The same happens in education. We need to strike this balance between ensuring that our children can still have some childhood, regardless of all of the dreadful circumstances that they find themselves in. Along with that, educational system is not supposed to be a greenhouse, because our reality is the military, the war reality. Therefore, the course, the protection of the country, we have this as a subject, but it's not about how to kill. It's supposed to be about how to protect, defend ourselves. So it's not like a shooting range. It's supposed to be about security, cybersecurity, about being able to pilot drones. A core part of it is supposed to be about medical assistance, providing first aid, and now our kids are beginning to learn the basics of tech med, because this is a ground reality. Well, not all Ukrainian children are doing that. I have studied this issue, and in Kief, unfortunately, at the city level, they haven't approved this program yet, but in other towns and cities, yes, you're right. Have you already included that in your curriculum as a subject? Yes, even prior to the full-scale invasion. But one more point to make in the context of education. You have alluded to Russia. We are moving so differently. Their propaganda is already such a cross-cutting issue in the education. The colleague has already alluded to President Reagan. He had a fantastic phrase when when they began to complain in Pentagon for underfunding Pentagon instead of sending funding to education. He said, if you think that national security issues are resolved in Pentagon, you are very much mistaken. This decision is being this problem right now is being tackled at the school desks right now. So to be able to uphold the educational front, we need to make a lot of effort. You have already mentioned Young Army in Russia. At the national level, they'll have a mandatory initiative which is called the Talk About the Important Things. And every week the children are indoctrinated, because 80% of this program consists of why the special military operation was inescapable. It was inevitable, why it affects every Russian child, why everybody must write a letter to the Russian military personnel And the children in the occupied territories also have to do it as a must, because everything is like a propaganda machine. They are also collected at assimilation camps to Crimea, for example, in the territory of Russia, for them to be retrained. And this propaganda is very efficient. And if we take a look at the new history book that was launched this year, they have added 17 new units. Let me quote the last 3 of them. Collusion or plot of the West against Russia, Ukraine as a neo-Nazist country, and the last thing, Russia is the country of heroes. And this is something that every child in Russia is learning right now, and we also have to be mindful of that. However, if we talk about security issues right now and about the long-term prospect of that, we have to be aware of the fact that nowadays it's only the countries whose citizens think critically, who can distinguish propaganda from the truth, those that can be flexible, agile, and creative, and those that are courageous enough to utilize all of these qualities are winning. They are at the spear of today's modernity, and our superpower is all about that. When talking about our eastern neighbors, they have destroyed in the last 10 years the civil society sector. And when we regard Ukraine as opposed to that, over the last 20 years, civil society has been a powerful force to motivate people to get changed. It has been a driver for numerous reforms. How do you assess the capacity of this civil society sector, especially during the last 3 years?
I'd say it's rather a quantum leap, because before that, civil society sector was a donor of political leaders, public administration, those who could scale up the new approaches and positive changes, whereas the last 3 years, the situation has catalyzed because of the funding, to be open, because my area, education, was always underfunded. Some industries were a little more lucky, but this emergence of big international programs, partners, that is the amount of funds that have to be quickly reoriented to resolve crisis problems. So I think civil society sector has so much progress over this period. They have different benchmarks, and I remember organizations on the auditor's report, and our civil society sector teaches organizations in other countries and continues to be the donor for other leaders of economy. No, talking about relations between civil society sector and the state, has this transformed? Have they become partners, or there is this light competition or misunderstanding, sometimes even clashes? Well, I'm competent to talk about education more. What can I say? With the emergence of big grant donor programs, it was sad to see that our organizations, between themselves, they had some competition, which was completely wrong. And now the situation is improving, where people start finding agreement and consensus. Let's not overlap and duplicate programs and projects. Let's be unique. Let's distribute to our zones of expertise. Now, if we talk about cooperation of public sector with the state, I've been in education system since Tabashnik was minister. And if you're ready to suggest assistance to the government, some star that they will put into a press release, then nobody will stand in your way. It's most important is nobody is, creating problems for you. So you give us, you let us do our work. If we can scale up something, the government is always ready to support that. Right, thank you. Talk about the role of the institutions and state and role of specific people who, in difficult times, who took it upon themselves to have responsibility. Well, and I would like you to tell us what really happened inside, considering what we've seen from the outside, like February 24th, when the large-scale invasion started. Many different decisions that they have to make to go somewhere to. But the question was number one was always that you had to have money for that, and we say that there were lines standing to the ATMs, but the money was there. Everything did work. Buttons got pushed. The money was transferring and nothing stopped. And not because we have great smartphones, but because there were people performing this work, maintaining. And we don't know much about their heroic deeds. So how was it? I was in Privatbank when the large-scale invasion started. And it was a moment, I think it was important that we had unity of the team. We all communicated. Just as well, there was unity of the state banks. I was from the Ministry of Finance. I was the curator of all public banks. But it's important in these difficult times to get together, to contact with each other. And just as well with National Bank, with the Ministry of Finance. Of course, there was a reform, international monetary funds, World Bank. There were mechanisms, but that's not enough. So it's a question of people, and we decided, as a bank, because we needed to help people in the first place, businesses second, because people were relocating, and I'm so happy that people got in their initiatives. Sometimes there was a case where we asked the people to evacuate, and people understood their responsibility. So in Bucha, we had a fantastic team. Everything was okay with them. I'm happy about it. But when that one friend told me later how they escaped, I don't know how they did it. But if it's personal for you, when you take it personal, when you're not alienating people, then intuitively you can run through dangerous times. So, when did you have the respite after this stressful time? When you realize that it's done? Well, I think summer this year, I started to realize what was happening. I did not leave Bucha. I stayed, but I understood it's my land, and I told everybody it's gonna save me. It's my. So if I'm needed, then. So it was a protective mechanism. I think many of us have found it in ourselves. So emotionally, we might not understand how difficult it is and how unexpected it is. Nobody could think that a life of a person in this century, after, that it could come to this, that a certain public space doesn't understand that a human life is the most important. So, because of the heavy losses, and we get attacked every day, maybe the value of human life has become less valuable. No, it's a difficult thing. You get nerves of steel to survive, and sometimes you are close. You kind of lock your heart against negative feelings, but then how do you get out of this? To learn to tolerate this pressure, well, we have to learn to teach each other. So after the professional challenge to keep private bank afloat in the first weeks and months, the nationalization of Alpha Bank that became a Sense Bank was a smaller challenge. You had some experience already from previous stress periods. Well, I was during the nationalization of Privatbank in 2016, but I was a bit later, in 3 months. I didn't see the critical things because I had quite a lot of experience after that in the Ministry of Finance. I thought it would be it would be easier when we did the nationalization. When I joined the team, but it turns out it's more difficult because people are more difficult. The system itself was pretty simple. It was differently. It was in Kiev. The situation in Dnipro was different. It was a separate state, so to say. You had to reach there before you can do anything. But as for relations with people, citizens who worked, the children and parents, that was a bit challenging. And I think you don't have to underestimate that. We think that we are experienced, but life gives you some more that you didn't have. So thank you so much. We'll get to that. Sergey, I wanted to ask you, how can you explain what is leadership in art? Can you be a leader in art? How different it is from other areas of life that we discussed on this discussion? Or is there not much difference? Can I say a few about the other things now? You started an interesting topic with Vsevolod. I would like to continue it because I think it's more related to our topic. It's about the army and what's happening there. Right. Okay, I agree. But before, just answer my short question. What for you would be more difficult in terms of leadership? To go to the army or to think that you can get a crowd of people as a writer? Well, of course, more scary to have a crowd because I got mobilized in the brigade that were my friends, and I trust them. So you said that the army is order, but I think discipline is clear, but the obedience, that's more about Soviet army. What we're building now, what we're trying to build within our brigade, like Hartia, and not only our brigade is doing that. So they want to transform. They're talking about NATO standards, about something concrete. And it's not about obedience, it's about obedience, it's about cooperation, cooperation between commanders, officers, and COs. So that gives the opportunity to have leaders. There's a popular phrase that everybody keeps repeating that an army is a mirror of society. But at the same time, many people who say it, they're looking at this mirror, idealizing it. Like, oh, this is some abstract army, they're the best people, best citizens, and we will support them more or less. But it's happening somewhere, it's outside. Whereas it's precise, and the army nowadays indeed is a mirror with all the negative and positive things, with rudimentary things and new things. And that's the transformation. So I think it's great to see the positive changes. I remember the meeting with sergeants. For me, it was very important to see several dozen sergeants in the brigade. These are all guys, some 30 years, everyone. However they could be if it wasn't for the war, would they be managers of a team of people? I don't know. They're all not military. They all started becoming military when the large-scale invasion started. So we're talking about leadership and leaders, and often we don't understand what do we mean, whom do we mean. So if we take our latest decade of history, so cultural leadership, political leadership, it's usually either a person that had political capital or financial capital, or there was this capital created for it. But now we're in the turbulent zone where these leadership qualities are identified very quickly, and a person discovers quickly something that they never did before. And now we have the generation of people that are 40, 50, 30 years, 40 years, and they take those functions that they never had before. And it's very interesting because these are people like, some people say the military will go back from war and get some order in the country. Well, it doesn't mean anything. The new generation that emerged because of this war, they are ready to take on the destiny of the country. It's about the military. It's about civilians that are here in the behind the front line. They do the new models in business and social sphere, and I think that's interesting to discuss. Sergei, why, when you talk about different capitals that leaders could have, you didn't mention social capital? Do you think that it doesn't work in Ukraine? No, I don't think it doesn't work, but it's just an obsolete model. It's called moral leaders, leaders of opinion. Usually, it's people who are assuming that they have an influence, but they don't in reality. So when we talk about young commanders or young business people who are inventing the new economy from scratch, these are the people who don't need to be publicized. They don't need public opinion, but their leadership is real because it is something that they really do. It is something that they really engage in. Right, Sergei. So when you say that the war forms new leaders in different levels, so we had this attempt back in year 13. What about the future? How do you bring these leaders to power? Well, that is a question that is no more relevant. How to they will reach the power themselves. I don't think you need to support them using old media mechanisms. Sorry, nothing personal, but or political or economic. So I think Ukraine has an evolutionary way to leave that concept of party leaders, oligarchy leaders, and other things that Ukraine from the 90s and 2000s were connected to. Somehow, by this harsh experiment that we are part of right now, because of the bloody, terrible things that are happening, so we have to change because otherwise it's suicide. We only lose if we don't change. Then nothing changes. But otherwise, new models await us, new policies and economic policies and cultural policies await us. Right. This is an interesting perspective. I want to talk to the panelists. Do you believe that Ukraine will evolve to a different perception of political culture, political attitude to policies? Because I think in 2014 we also had this idealization that the warriors will come to the power and with some order, but they didn't create a powerful union. Do you agree with Sergei that this war is going to change political culture? It can. To what extent it will change? I think each time we thought it was going to be much faster. If you look at historically what was happening, like me personally, I believe that it's going to be faster. But then I started to be more pragmatic and realized that maybe we're broken now so much that it's so difficult, it's so hard to achieve everything. This evolution is so difficult. So it will change, but how? And I think this is where it's very important so that each of us would understand that they are responsible and tolerate the old ways not. That's where public opinion is important. So we need some kind of leadership in intellectual elite somehow. So there has to be public opinion that influences and speeds up the processes. So in several of the one, two, yeah, I agree. I don't think it's an evolutionary way right now that is happening, because there are such immense tests, and I think comparison with the 2014 is far-fetched. It's not relevant to what's happening right now. It's much more dramatic what's happening now than what was there before. And I think this generation, which is being born due to these events, is going to be capable of much more, I think. And I wouldn't talk about parliament now. It's about public civil society and proactive population, proactive people that are outside parliament. Because without the impact, without the pressure from the ground up, without creating the models that will have influence on politicians, there will be no change. Even if best people come to the parliament, we saw them sitting there and feeling okay and forgetting about everything. Yeah, parliament. It's an interesting conversation. I would like to say just one thing. Why I think it's not correct to compare this current situation with the 2014. Not because the war now is total and it's about everyone, all regions, unlike what was there starting in 2014, but because we often are unaware of one thing. Time is linear, and in these 10 years, a new generation, the first generation of children of independence grew up. Children who grew up in independent Ukraine. We underestimate this importance of institutional base. So these children, from the beginning, they had a Ukrainian education. They lived in the reality of Ukrainian state. It wasn't like broken generation that was first it was communist and then it was in Ukraine transitioned. So it's a completely different thing with all the caveats, but it's a different situation. And now the children have grown up. They're 30 years old now, and they take responsibility. They become leaders. You don't have to make them leaders. They are. They are already in the conditions where you either survive and you become a leader, or you have no chance. So your colleague in Khartia started saying about population, and we talk about electorate. How do you change the electorate and their attitude? Because we have the stereotype, if you talk about political ambitions, if you want to go there, it's perceived like, oh, you want to get some gains, not to be a leader, to take responsibility to what will be happening in the state. I can bet that the trust and popularity and respect to Sergei Zhadan here, as a writer, as a military servant, can be nullified after you go into politics. That's why I'm not doing it. But how do you change it? How do we get new leaders if people like you don't go into politics? And only bad people go into politics. How do we change anything with that? If you have an idea, please, I think only through education and proper upbringing, imprints, the values, the communication, and the family. Because we all say it's school and kindergarten, but whether the family is doing enough in upbringing of the next population. Right, Sergey and Elena, they picked up all my topics about education. I can share an interesting example. It's a very practical example, but you can find it interesting. A school is one of the large-scale educational projects. It's been for 10 years now, and the first year it's a Canadian team. So there were elections into student parliament. For me, it was a representative of our Ukrainian experience, where students had creative campaigns. They had these messages and slogans: "We'll do away with the uniform. Organize this, organize that." There were attempts at collusion, etc. But then, when they selected the students' council, they came and they showed what is expected from them. This is expected. This is their thing now. They can't do away with the form because it's not part of it. And then it only came down to 3 meetings, but only after 7 years of this gradual work, bringing up these leaders, that's only when it works. So people who are interested, this initiative is growing, and they can only do that through Pornhub. But it's mental change, mental transformation. It takes long. But if a question when it's going to happen, evolution or non-evolution, this is not evolutionary way. This is revolutionary through the large-scale invasion. And how important it is to have young leaders. Well, she mentioned that. But because of this revolution, we have a filter of who's remaining in the country. And I think everyone who's working 24/7, their vote with their life to Ukraine, they are optimistic, healthy optimism, and they are brave enough to take responsibility.
Quite a different political culture in the United States. Your politicians, lawmakers are not being hated by your population by default, like they are in Ukraine. So how have you achieved this?
Well, I think right now there are some politicians that are hated in America today. But I do think we have some great leaders in the U.S. that are selfless, that are doing it for the right reason, many of them. Some of them, unfortunately, no. We have the same problems. I think, for us at American University Kief, one of the things we want to do to bring to Ukraine is the American style of teaching. And we hope that will help in many ways, in business, but also in democracy. And so the American style of teaching is much more interactive than previously, and I'm going by what my team has told me, but the previous education system here, more Soviet-style didactic, where the professors talk at students and don't interact as much. We're much more interactive. We want the students to challenge the professors, and the professors are there for the students. So that hopefully will create better leaders that are more thoughtful, able to tackle difficult challenges, but also be respectful of authority. So that's one of the things we're trying to bring. Just as an aside, one of the things we're trying to do to make them better leaders prepared for the workforce when they go out to work for Ukraine is we're giving internships abroad, and we sent 18 interns to the United States and to UK this summer on paid internships to JP Morgan, Blackstone, Doka. Next year we want to do 200 interns, and so we hope that when they graduate from American University Kief, they're much better leaders for the experiences that are being provided.
Дуже вам дякую. Мені
Thank you. I would never quote Russian media, but now in the context of what I heard from you, I would like to do it because I met this opinion where starting from year 14, Russian educators said that the biggest challenge in working with Ukrainian children was, that's their interpretation, that our Ministry of Education were managed by American methodologists, and the system started to rebuild itself, that a child can contradict the teacher, can ask a question, they can have a different opinion, and the Russian system of education has to give the Ukrainian children to understand that the authority is the highest value, that the teacher is the utmost authority. So, speaking truth to power, having integrity, Ukraine has progressed because our adversary says so. Thank you for this discussion. We want to. We have another guest.
Вас добре чуємо, так, і
Yes, we can hear you very well, loud and clear, and all of our audience can also see you clearly. Metropolitan Boris Gudzyak joining us online, the Metropolitan of the Ukrainian Catholic Church in the USA. Something that we would like to discuss with you after we have had this conversation with our panelists, and we'll also have a Q&A session, by the way, with our audience. So, dear panelists, get ready for that. What makes an individual a leader? In their place, at their spot, in their workstation, regardless of their occupation, because not everyone can go for a particular discovery. Not everyone will become a hero of Ukraine or a Nobel Prize winner. So what can make one a leader? You see, there are different types of leadership. There are Donald Trumps, Elon Musk's, that enjoy a great deal of attention, bask in their attainments. But the question is this leadership is to help people? Is this helpful to the general humanity? Time definitely will show and testify to that. But for me, leadership must always be exploited for the sake of good. It must always be of moral dimension, must always contain this moral dimension. It's supposed to underscore the human dignity which has been given to us of God. People have to understand the dignity of their fellow humans, and thus they will realize their own dignity. So leadership has to foster solidarity. A good leader is to work in a subsidiarity way, that is, recognizing the talents, skills, and creativity of other people, even those people who hierarchically are subjected to them, report to them. And leadership is also supposed to act in the best interests and for the good of everyone. So these are the main 4 principles of the Catholic social doctrine, something that we teach within our social programs. So human dignity, something that we've been able to testify during different Maidans when people got together and thousands of people would turn into leaders. We were able to see our nation growing its solidarity, or it has already garnered a great deal of recognition and acknowledgement for that in the world. Our army has been working based on the principle of subsidiarity. Both the guys and the girls on the front line didn't have to wait every single time for a command or an order to come to them somewhere from the top. This was at least the distinction that we experienced at the beginning of this full-scale invasion, the distinction between the Russian and the Ukrainian armies. And our action, our leadership, our cooperation, our communication is to act in the best interests and fostering the good for everyone. There are some leaders that stand at the helm, that spearhead, or they stand up on the shoulders of other people, like Hitler's and Stalin's. Nowadays, we have a lot of political leaders who are real autocrats, who just work seeking their own gain, who want to be at the center stage, and perhaps they're gaining what they're seeking. But from the standpoint of eternity, from the perspective of the broad base And long term, this can hardly be named a good example of leadership. Thank you very much indeed for this answer. Something else I would like to question you about from your perspective. What do you think leadership is rewarded, and the lack of leadership, how can that be punished? Well, it heavily depends also on different circumstances. Good leadership is rewarded with peace and true happiness. That is, a leader who upholds others, who fosters and creates this kind of general goodness and happiness, is not only does not only feel responsible, but also extremely delighted, does nothing better but infuse life, making others enthusiastic, making people to tap into their own potential and feel their own fulfillment. Within good systems, where laws unfortunately fail, healthy laws that would preserve the above-mentioned principles. There are leaders who unfortunately are forced to leave their positions, and they're ousted from these positions, regrettably. Numerous issues persist, and they can be resolved only through the perspective of eternity. Sadly or fortunately, there are a great number of people who will never experience a justice at the hands of leaders in this world. I often get myself thinking about our brothers and sisters who died during the Great Famine time in the 1930s, or the people who lost all of their property, all of their legacy, their households, their limbs and lives during this time of war. This is also a consequence of horrendous leadership, not only because of President Putin, but the whole generation of the Russian colonialists who have passed on the spirit of colonialism and imparted that in the nation of Russia and infused their culture with that. Not everything is punishable within the dimensions of history. However, God's judgment will also come. These are huge issues which are not that easy to tackle. All right. Then let me ask you one more question about leadership and the church. I beg your pardon ahead of time if my questions seem to sound wrongly or stereotypical from your perspective, because more often than not, people, due to the lack of their own leadership or unwillingness to assume responsibility and start active, will always say, well, God will identify, it's all in the hands of God. But when you say to people, you need to act, you need to fight, you need to take the first step, in response, what you hear is, we need to turn to God more frequently. So how would you take this response of these people? How would you answer this category of people? So what is the connection between this kind of responses and leadership? Well, I don't think that sincere guiding and instructing people who speak like that is the biggest problem. If people are sincere, it's right. There's nothing wrong about that. That we have to rely on God. We have to pin our hopes on God and trust in God. But when we speak about moral upbringing, there's still a precautions concerning excessive trust that people may place in God. When they don't want to do anything, they just sit idle on their hands. And moral theology presupposes, and people will always say so, of course you pray to God, but you also lay your hands on different things and start acting. So spiritual life and true interaction with the living God is in no way to make us irresponsible. Although, however, there are some different pseudo-spiritualities, spiritual depression, as we may refer to it, when people get despondent. Different people find themselves at different points in lives when people get depressed by and totalitarian systems in many ways catered for the creation of such situations, and unfortunately this sometimes may even persist within the church. But the majority of authentic believers that I know, on the contrary, they trust God, and from that they get such a lot of inspiration that makes them never to get despondent, never be down in the dumps. They believe in eternity. That's why they are not fearful of the death that might come any moment. They are ready to sacrifice themselves, put their lives on the line, and be able to sacrifice even the nearest for the sake of the principles that we have mentioned. Mr. Metropolitan, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much for joining us today. This morning, not many people have been able to go to the church today due to different aerated attacks that we have suffered from. But once again, we have heard a lot of wonderful words that you have said to us. Thank you very much indeed. So once again, Metropolitan Boris Gudzyak has just been with us online. Thank you for your resilience and steadfastness. I think that everyone is very pensive right now, but still, we would like to hear some questions from the audience members, and raise your hand and get the mic before you pose your questions. Good afternoon. My name is Vasyuk Volodymyr. I'm in charge of a research company, and we get with different issues of industrialization. However, right now we are more into humanitarian issues, and such cool questions have been just raised. Something that Ms. Zoya has spoken about, the history subject, and the way that Russians teach history right now, something that Ukrainians, unfortunately, were never aware of, and it's when this threat comes to their land, they begin to react to that. So this kind of event, which is right now during this war, it's supposed to change us as a nation. So we have referred to Putin, to Mr. Reagan. So my question is there a history book in Ukrainian which carries a fantastical answer to all of the things that we have already addressed today? There's a lot of interest in Ukraine, but can we answer the question who Ukrainians are? It seems to me that we are still unaware of the specific answer to this question. This is question one. Second question, do you see this textbook on history developed in Ukraine? Because somehow it seems to us that history is largely ignored right now. We are talking about the struggle to be able to communicate to the whole world of what Ukrainians are. Is anyone engaged in creating such textbooks? And brief questions to Sergei and his fellow mate. What makes the Ukrainian army different from the army of the enemy? Something which is a core that we are supposed to foster and develop further, something that concerns leadership and interacting with other humans. Something which is of principal difference. I understand the first question was related to me. Yes, your question is really comprehensive. In order to obtain one history book, to be able to project everything that relates to our common historical memory, we need to engage in first a dialogue and then come up with a consensus concerning our historic memory. So I can honestly tell you we don't have such a history book available, but there are some people, leaders, those who are already beginning to talk about these issues, raise these issues, and try to make sure that we arise at the same denominator concerning our national identity, because once again, there is a great multiplicity of opinions. Mechanically speaking, people's education or training isn't done by books. It's something that our neighbors think and believe in. People are trained by what they see, what they hear, whatever happens around them. So being Ukrainian is not only about history, but it's also about maths, physics, language. The main idea is to have the educators nearby that will be guided by these principles and will support such kids. By the way, interestingly, numerous teachers volunteered to go and to the front line, and the greatest number of school teachers that joined the army were history teachers. I wanted to say that history book is not something that we need to live by. It's not the only thing that we need to live by. Culture overall, films, historic films, they are perceived very well. culturally speaking. If you sit at the table, you give them some exhibitions to see, some cartoons to watch, and it begins to shape the kids from inside. This identity begins to express itself more broadly. Of course, a lot heavily depends on your parents, because whatever the textbook may be that you are taught from at school, but when you come home and your parents don't express themselves as leaders, for example, they only communicate in Russian, not in Ukrainian, then it will be hard for these kids to go to school and identify themselves as Ukrainians. With reference to the army things, leadership is something which is a distinction between us, and we need to develop it further, because the enemy's army is based on harsh discipline. The discipline they have in place is based on the fear of death. Their commanders have certain powers which commanders in our army have none, because this is completely impermissible for us. There, the commander is in his full right. If an order is not complied with, they can apply arms against such people. We know about that perfectly well when we take people prisoner, and we have a lot of evidence to speak in favor of such a position. So treating people in the humane way, and they treat people as animals to a large extent. Regrettably, we also have such cases in place that persists within our forces too, and we need to eradicate that. And I suppose this is our main advantage, and that's something that we need to keep contributing to. Although it may appear like it undermines discipline, but it doesn't undermine, because leaders can discipline themselves, that's all. I'm not very savvy about what happens within the Russian army, how they are guided or motivated by only the things which are there in the public space and domain, but can we shape my opinion like this? Something that distinguishes the Ukrainian army as of today, and this is once again from the standpoint of communication as a member of our brigade, and not only. It seems to me this is characteristic and maybe not 100% typical of us, but anyway, our fighters, soldiers, and non-commissioned officers, etc., even in the terms and conditions of this war, they still want not to lose themselves, not to get lost in this brutal war. They still are very clearly mindful of how they want to end this war, what they want themselves to be at the end of this war. They have a clear image of how they will continue this life after this war. So this war hasn't deprived them of their self-identity. They continue being involved in different kinds of processes, and they want to integrate their leadership in that. So when you continue talking to such people, so you see that they keep planning for themselves. It's not pink-tainted image of life. They understand that it will be hard, but they want to preserve their own lives, their own values and principles. Why? To make sure that when they get back to the civic life, they want to be with the people that matter for them, that matters for them enormously. So this humane self-preservation may sound very lofty, but we get to notice this very frequently. Taras Litoshenko, a representative of the private sector. Well, this is pretty much of a humanitarian conversation that we are engaged in. I would like to address everyone. You are talking as if this is something wrong. No, on the contrary. Ms. Zoya has just mentioned the spring of 2022 as one of the best periods, despite all odds. At that time, everyone wanted to contribute as best as they could. It was scary on the one hand. It was such an acute concern and anxiety. We didn't have problem paying taxes at the time, though I think it was one of the best periods for us to go through in a certain way, for us all as well as for the whole society. On the other hand, we are speaking about leadership and future. We keep talking about changes, evolvement, transformation, moving ahead, etc. So my question is, wouldn't you like changes to make some changes back, to get back to the time of spring 2022? If so, how can that be achieved? Well, sometimes it crosses my mind as a leader, as a manager, that I have to be more stern, harsher, maybe due to the environment that I'm engulfed in. It's something that mobilizes you and the people around you. And you get yourself thinking, well, perhaps this is something that makes you a superhuman, and maybe basically unite all of us, this being self-critical when it brings a situation to a head and something that gives you a boost to get changed. But it doesn't seem to be very right. On the other hand, we need to understand what we are capable of. You see, back then we united. We could assume this responsibility. We could join efforts with others. So we just need to remember that and be conscious of the fact that we can implement it even in normal situations. It's possible to do it in the state of normalcy, not only during the times of emergencies. So the public opinion, within the public opinion, each and every one of us needs to feel responsible for that. If I may also present my personal opinion, no, I wouldn't like us to slide back to the time of spring 2022, because although during 2022 we got stronger and more resilient and we obtained lots of important lessons that we cannot deny, however, two things that we specifically lack is the potential, the strength, the internal resources that we had in the early 2022. For that, of course, we need to learn how to care about ourselves and how to uphold this resource, understand how we can maintain our teams. Another thing, this is the cohesion that was incredible at that time that you have mentioned, when the enemy was clearly visible. That's something that also contributes to creating our national identity. Nowadays, due to this impossibility, not so much to exert influence on the external enemy, we begin to search for internal enemies. But that's something that we can still work with. But still, I'm reluctant to slide back to 2022, but I'm still sometimes nostalgic of that time. Clearly, I do not understand changes for the going back to the past. Still, I do not understand. Meaning, how can you learn to mobilize even though the enemy is not besieging Kiev? No, I wouldn't like us to get back to that time, because I don't want to relive again this a dreadful experience. All of those horrible moments of life that we have collectively gone through. We have already made a lot of conclusions and we have taken it on. We have moved on. That's why it's definitely not an option for us to get back to. Well, changing things, of course, it's a good thing. I don't know whether we need to get back anywhere in time and how much back in time we have to go. I would endeavor to answer this question in a philosophical and humanitarian way. In this case, the question is whether we would like to get back in time. It sounds pretty much like you're an individual stepping into the ice-cold water, trying to cross this river, and you're in the middle of the river, and they're saying to you, would you like to get back? Because it was warm, it was dry, you were not dry, you were not shivering with cold. Somebody would like perhaps to get back to the shore where you started from, but I think it's much more desirable for us to reach the opposite bank as soon as possible to get the shore, and it's impossible for us to get back to the previous bank. Thank you very much, Sergei, for the brilliant ending that you have presented to our panel discussion. I thank all of the panelists. Thank you very much for your attention, for the involvement of the audience, for your brilliant questions. Thank you, and see you soon.